Hi there, I'm Dr. Myrdalis Diaz-Ramirez, and this is the Design Your Physician Life podcast. Welcome to this episode brought to you by our Max Salary Mastermind, a personal and professional development program for physicians who want to learn entrepreneurship. Today, we're going to be talking with Dr. Bradley Block about optimizing your practice for career longevity. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to the Design Your Physician Life podcast, where you will get excited about being a physician, learn the tools that can help boost your success, and great tips from successful doctors. Join us to unlock the keys to an amazing physician life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Myrdalis Diaz-Ramirez.
Hey guys, welcome to this episode. I'm very excited. Today we have Dr. Bradley Block. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really been looking forward to this. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Thank you. Same here. I admire your podcast. We're fellow podcasters, so we're very excited admirers of each other. So you are a private practice otolaryngologist, ENT physician based out of Long Island, New York, and you're there with your wife, your 3 young sons. You're a partner at the largest ENT and allergy practice in the whole United States. I believe like 130 or 130 something out of 250 that you have. That's a wonderful experience. And you bring a lot of, besides your experience, your expertise to that practice. You also have contributions beyond that, which is your podcast that's called The Physician's Guide to Doctoring. And there you're discussing how physicians can be the best version of themselves inside and outside the exam room. So welcome to our podcast. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So Florida, New York, here we are, East Coast, US. But before you were there, tell me how you got into medicine. Was it like little Bradley or young Bradley, teen Bradley?
It is
Who was the one who decided to be a doctor?
It is Mrs. Block. No, actually my parents were like, "Are you sure? You're going to have to talk to people." So that gives you some sense of how good I was at interacting with other human beings, right? Not so good when your own parents are like, you're going to have to talk to people if you're a doctor.
So wait a second. You're the first person who comes in the podcast and tells me that their parents did not want them to be a doctor for some reason.
No, because
brought up a butt.
I was, I'm Gen X, right? I grew up in the 90s, and the thing to be then was an investment banker. So they were like, they were making tons of cash. My parents were like, that's the way to go, be an investment banker. And, where I went to college, everyone became a consultant or an investment banker. So they tried to dissuade me. But actually my path to medicine is not some inspiring story. I just couldn't think of anything better to do. I was good at science. I didn't have like any internships under my belt. I didn't have a clearly design. Nobody had designed my life, but if I became a physician, then there was this clear path, and I had the grades to do it. I had the scores to do it. I had all the prerequisites to do it because I was a science major. It was the stuff that I was interested in. So it wasn't like completely out of the blue. I wasn't like an art history major. And then I was like, oh, you know what? I'll become a doctor. So, I was going to be doing something in the sciences. I just didn't know what. And physician was an easy answer. And so here I am, right? Not the most inspiring story, but actually a little more to that. One, I studied abroad in Jerusalem, and, it's one of those incredible cities of the world. There's no other city like it. And I was a junior in college, no direction. And that city gave me this sense of gravitas. Right? The sense that I wanted to do something important with my life. And one of my friends from studying abroad, he's still one of my good friends. Actually, he's been on my podcast. He's a spine surgeon. He was going into medicine. I was like, you know what? That sounds like a good idea. And so the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it fit my abilities and it fit my goals. That being said, it was a narrow view of the world. I didn't know all of the other options out there or things that I possibly could be. So it fit. And I took a year off to, finish all my prereqs and take my MCATs. And I applied, made it in one school, off the wait list, skin of my teeth, and here I am.
And what does your diploma say?
Yeah, Yeah, what do you call
doctor,
the
right?
person? Yeah, what do you call the person who graduates last in their class from the worst medical school in the country? Yes, we're all doctor.
Come on. So you're a doctor and you're here, and it turns out that you're one of 250 other doctors in this wonderful group that you are. It's the largest ENT group in the country. Um, Before you went there, you went directly from your residency to your job that you've had now for 12 years, which is an achievement and accomplishment for many physicians. And it's not something that, on average, physicians change at least 2.5 times during their careers, jobs. I've changed a little bit more than that myself. I've been a little bit restless, but you have stayed in that job for a long time. So it has served you well, it has served your family well, and it has served your patients well. And now you've learned so much in that area and have so much curiosity from that experience that you have this podcast where you teach other physicians how to be the best version of yourself inside and outside
Well, not
the
totally.
office.
Not totally. I'm not teaching other physicians. I'm getting other people on the show to teach me. So then therefore it teaches the other, the listeners of a podcast. You're basically the way I see it, you're the fly on the wall of an interesting conversation. And so I get people that can help me be the best version of myself. So, and then in doing so, hopefully I help some of the listeners along the way.
What interested you about ENT in medical school? Why did you become an ENT?
So that was a bit of a circuitous path. So I know I said, I made it into medical school off the wait list, skin of my teeth, but then I, really grinded through and I did well, and I matched into otolaryngology, which was competitive and, even much more competitive now. But I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. One of the things that I was interested in was pediatric cardiology, because the congenital heart defects, just all the physiology, how they develop. Well, if this closes off, then that puts the pressure here. Everything kind of made sense to me. And then I spent some time with some pediatric cardiologists, and in my particular program, there wasn't much intervention happening. So it was a lot of like normal echoes. It was like, okay, pediatrician heard a murmur. You go in, get your echo. Okay, it's a normal echo. You're going to do fine. Like, it was a lot of that. It was a lot of like well visits, pretty much. And I was like, oh, this isn't for me. I want to do an intervention. And so then I came across otolaryngology, and I remember there was a kid with huge adenoids, couldn't breathe through his nose at all, just like couldn't eat his breakfast because he couldn't breathe through his nose. He had to like hold his breath every time he was trying to eat something. They took him to the operating room, took out his adenoids, low risk, like low morbidity intervention, easy recovery. And this kid's life has changed, right? They might even be to a point where they are failing to thrive, right? They're not gaining weight. You take out their adenoids, boom, now they're eating, they're gaining weight. Small intervention, huge difference. I loved that. So I thought I wanted to be a pediatric otolaryngologist. So I matched into otolaryngology, and as it turns out, that's like laryngotracheal reconstructions and mastoidectomies and like all this complex pediatric airway.
But wait, not that much. I sign up, but for
So now what I'm doing
second
now,
part.
I see tons of kids in my practice, and I'm still doing that same stuff. Tubes, tonsils, adenoids. I take care of adults too. Septum, sinus, snoring, sleep apnea, all the rest of it. And then, as a general otolaryngologist, one of the great things is I get to see multiple generations of the same family. Like I just saw like the parent of one of my patients, and I've been seeing this kid since he was 1. Like, and now he's in high school, like, or he's about to start high school. I've been doing this for 12 years, so maybe that math didn't work out, but you know what I mean? Like it's amazing because, there is continuity of care in otolaryngology, right? You're taking care of, I'll do a frenulum on a 4-day-old, and then I'll take care of dizziness in a 90-year-old, and they might all be part of the same family. So, there's a lot that's great about otolaryngology. Now, when we do our training, we spend all this time doing like these big head and neck cancer resections. And, that's not part of my practice now. I've kind of niched down to the stuff that I really liked from the start and I still like.
So that takes us to a conversation we were having earlier. You've been doing this for 12 years and you are in the exciting Long Island. And
Hey, I like
and
Long Island.
no, I know you do. I know you do. Like that's where your family is, and that's where your patients are. And
Yeah,
but the point is that you've been doing this for 12 years in the same practice, which you
yeah,
were very fortunate to find, which, it has its pros and cons. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the pros of a physician who's found this long-term practice and the cons of somebody who's been on the same practice for such a long time. So let's start with the pros of being there in your community of Long Island.
yeah. So as you said, the pros, the community. So I've got this now. I've got this footprint. I've got this reputation. I've got tons of patients. I got lots of people know my name, and the my biggest referral is Facebook. Is those Facebook groups. Oh, is there a good otolaryngologist? Does anyone know a good ENT? I'm having this XYZ problem. And then what my patients tell me, because I'm not in those towns, I live a little further away, is that, oh, by the way, like this is how I found you. And it's a great feeling. It's a great feeling to hear that you're doing a good job and that people like you. Who doesn't want to be liked, right? And so, but that was hard fought. That was hard fought because we talked about my podcast. A lot of what we cover in my podcast is doctor-patient interaction. And so, I said earlier, my parents were like, "Oh, you're gonna have to talk to people, right?" Not so good at it. It might seem that way on the podcast, having a conversation. A few people love talking about themselves more than I do, right? But I wasn't, that good at interacting with patients. So it was like an iterative process. So it was a lot of work to get to that point. But it's really nice to be in that place now and get that type of feedback and those kind of accolades from your patients. So that's the great part. The other great part is I've grown up with this practice. The practice has been around, I think, 30 years, and I've been with it for 12, and I've seen it grow and develop, and I've played some leadership roles. I've never been on the board. We have like a 7-physician board. I've never been on the board. I might want to run for it at some point. Who knows if I'd be elected, but I've still had opportunities within the practice to help steer the ship. And that's fulfilling because I take ownership. It's my practice. So that's some of the pros.
Let's stick with the pros for a little while
Okay.
before we go to the cons. Let's stick with the
Before I
pros
get
because this is
before I get grumpy. Yeah.
let's not go there yet. So we'll say that for later. So in the pros, you're talking about how, with the podcast that you have right now, how to be a better physician, and it took you some work. And right now when talking about mindset, one of the things that we talk is like, if something is hard, then we say if it's really a worthy challenge. And in your case, it was really a worthy challenge to learn how to communicate with people. And that was something that was recognized, which is a little bit of, of a situation that even your parents identified before you went to medical school. They knew you well. And then you came to it. You came to the point where, you need good bedside manners, right? To be able to get your patients, to communicate, to be able to be successful in what you're doing, not only because of getting patients, but in their plan of care. Because if you don't have good bedside manners, it might be that your plan of care is going to be really bad at the end, and you're going to have more poor outcomes, right? And you're going to have, when they're recommending, or they're talking to you, about you on Facebook, the conversation is going to be different. It might say, what, that Dr. Blog, he's just like this. He's a good surgeon, but just don't talk to him. Right?
Bit of a wet blanket. Yeah, bit of a curmudgeon. And it's also not as enjoyable. It's not as enjoyable if every patient interaction is a struggle. And if most of them are ending like, "Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I totally understand what's going on now. Oh, this makes so much sense." Like that's like every visit becomes more fulfilling. So instead of draining you, it fills you. Not everyone. I'm not I want to sound like Pollyanna. I have plenty of interactions where I leave the visit. I'm like, "Oh man, that was taxing." But I still try my best to help, but sometimes it's more of a struggle than others.
So when you found yourself going through these interactions where, now it's your turn to really talk, especially when you graduated and then you're there, oh my goodness, it's my office, I have to make it work. And I don't want them to fire me. Why? Did you find any techniques or anything that you did on purpose, or anything that grew with you that you can tell, even in a bad day, this is something that you do? for talking to people? I don't know if it's humor or just, talking about your connections, what it is that you use to be able to be a
There's
better communicator.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff. There's lots of stuff. So, I'll hit some of the highlights. So one of the things that I've realized is there's sometimes a question behind the question. So and I actually got someone on the podcast who wrote a book called The Question Behind the Question. Turns out he and I were talking about two completely different things. His question behind the question was something else. But mine is like there's this undercurrent, this underlying concern. There's something about this that really bothers them. So a patient comes in, like, let's say they're seeing an otolaryngologist, they're seeing a specialist, and they've got a cold. And you're thinking in your head, like, you've got a stinking cold. What are you seeing me for? What are you seeing any doctor for? Right? Like, if you're like seeing patient after patient, you're like, oh, they're wasting my time. What are they doing here? What am I doing here? Like, that's not fulfilling. That's not enjoyable. So you have to really dig a little deeper and find out, like, what was it that was driving them to get there? What's their question behind the question? The thing that they're not asking. Oh, doc, I've got this like lump in my throat. No, like, yeah, you find you got a little reflux. It's giving you a lump in your throat or whatever, like some, xerostomia, your mucus is a little viscous. It's giving you a bit of a lump in your throat. But some of those patients need to hear you don't have throat cancer. And until you say those words, like, they will leave unfulfilled. But the moment you say, so you have to, like, and what I found is the phrase, what about this worries you, can be used in many, many visits. So what about this worries you? So I've got some, like, just a couple phrases that I use that can work a lot of the time. Or like that patient that comes in with a cold, like, you're like, listen, what I see, this is what I'm thinking. What are you worried about? What concerns you about this? Doc, I can't tell when it's a cold and when it's a sinus infection. How do I go to this place, this urgent care, and they're always giving me a Z-Pack, and, I feel better, but is that the right thing? So we go through some teaching about how do you tell the difference between a cold and a sinus infection and allergies. Like, you do that extra teaching, you got to figure out rather than just treating, the person in front of you, treating the person that's at home later that day too. So the question behind the question, what's really driving them to be there, and what is their underlying concern? So that's one thing. And those visits then become a lot more fulfilling and relationship building. And so there's that. You mentioned humor. So humor is something we can use that really, you want to lighten the mood. You want the patient to be less anxious and more susceptible to learning and retaining the information. If you can make them laugh or even giggle, it allows them to relax a little and not only enjoy the visit, but be more receptive to new information. But you
Do you
gotta
talk about
do it.
sports?
No, I don't at all.
Mets or Yankees or any of
Oh,
that stuff? Like, oh my goodness, I can't imagine.
no, I see people come in their sports gear all the time, but I haven't followed sports since the 1986 Mets. So sports are definitely not for me. But with joking, it's important that you follow this one rule, and that is that the point of humor is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. So you're never going to punch down. You're never going to make fun of the patient. You're going to be like, oh, doc, is this going to hurt? Well, it's not going to hurt me. Like, that's not funny, because that's making fun of the fact that they are about to be uncomfortable. But you can make fun of the electronic medical record. You can make fun of the healthcare system. You can make fun of, like, a politician. You can make fun. I mean, you might not want to get political, but if you can, read the room correctly, then you may be able to, right? Like, you as long as you're punching up, then the jokes are fine, but never ever punch down. And you also don't want to use too much self-deprecating humor that would undermine their confidence in your abilities. So you can make fun of yourself for running late. You can make fun of yourself for not being able to type, but you can't make fun of yourself for not being a competent physician, because you don't want to undermine yourself. So there are some rules there with using humor, but as long as you follow those rules, then even if you have a joke that's not good, you can say, oh, you know what? I'll stick to my J job. I should make sure I stick to doctoring. Clearly, this humor thing is not working for me. So,
You can
there's
say,
a
I'm
way to
no
save
Dr.
yourself.
Glaucon Flecken, but
Yeah. Well, he is the king of punching up, right? If you look at his jokes, he never ever punches down. Everything he does is hilarious, and all of it is punching up. So he's really a genius at that. So those are a couple of ways to make the visits more enjoyable, more fulfilling. And then also, like, the body language. So people use body language. I think nonverbal communication is a better one. Eye contact is important, but not too much eye contact. Like you want to do enough eye contact that you notice the color of your patient's eyes. So make sure, rather than staring at your computer the whole time or looking at the floor, like look in your patient's eyes enough so that you notice their eye color. Not just theirs, but everybody's in the room. So that's important. Two is making sure you have enough facial expression. So you may be really listening to what the patient's saying, but if you're stone-faced, they are going to think you are not paying attention, especially if you're typing in your EMR. So you need to amp up whatever your normal facial expression. I mean, if you're a very expressive person, then don't amp it up even more. But I tend to be pretty stone-faced. I know it doesn't look like that on the podcast because I can see myself in the camera, so I'm doing it on purpose. But like really try to be expressive enough that they know that you're listening and that you care. Really use those brows, use those facial expressions. And then vocal tonality, you want to be intentional about, because one, you can really express caring there in your vocal tonality, right? Wow, that sounds really uncomfortable, right? Sounds very different from, yeah, that sounds uncomfortable. Really using that vocal to express interest. And the other thing is, so you're using your nonverbal cues to express interest and authority. So the authority is like, this is what's happening. This is the plan. Really be decisive in the cadence and the volume of your speech such that they recognize your authority and confidence.
I'm just here having such a pleasurable time watching you, listening to you say these things, because you've given us a huge lesson on communicating with the patient. And I think that your parents should listen to this podcast if they're
Yeah.
available, so that they know what you become, because you've gotten that challenge that you had in communication that everybody identified, and you made, like, you're an expert on this. You should be really telling the world about this, especially students and residents, about how to communicate. Like, this is a wonderful, wonderful lesson. I have got goosebumps. Really, it's I really have never, even myself, and I'm a little bit ahead of you in your career, 10 years ahead, and I've never heard it expressed like this way. So thank you for that lesson. That's been wonderful.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
really means a lot. Maybe I will take this show on the road.
Yes, you should. You should. The other thing, okay, so we talked about that you've learned to communicate with your patients. You have this rapport that you've been building with them. The other thing that you mentioned, being part of the community and of a practice that you've seen growing, right? That's one of the pro of this. So tell us a little bit about that whole process in terms of those connections that you made as a pro of finding this long-term career as a physician.
So do you mean like the leadership positions that I've had within the practice itself?
Well, one of the things is like you felt you're right now part of this huge group, the largest group, which I don't think when you took that job you ever thought ever that you were going to be part of such a large group, and much less being, in, as you say, in leadership positions for such a group. So tell us about how that evolution has been for you as a good thing, as a pro of having found this job right out of the bat when you came out of residency.
So for me, joining the group was like, how did I pick the group? Picking the group was a no-brainer, because you see, either you're going to join a big multi-specialty group, you're going to be a hospital system, or you're going to join a small practice where they tell you, listen, you're with us for a couple of years, you'll become a partner. Well, what does partner really mean? Well, it means you'll get paid a little more, but really I own the practice. It's my practice. It's never going to be your practice. You'll get a small percentage of it, but you're not really going to, I'll take care of everything. You don't have to worry about it. And then, I interviewed at this big practice that's like, they've democratized it, right? Like, it's an elected board of physicians. So we don't have administrators. We have a C-suite of non-physicians, but they are the arm of the physician board. Ultimately, the physician board are the big decision makers, if there are ever big decisions, and the C-suite works for the board. Now the C-suite, we just had our CEO retire, and he was the CEO since it's the inception, and he did an incredible job growing this practice. And he really did run the show. But ultimately, like, if the physicians put their foot down on something like that, that was it, because they're the ones that see patients every day. So for me to see that type of a practice, it was like, man, that sounds awesome. I definitely want to be a part of that. And when anyone joins like a different practice in the area, I think, what is wrong? Why did this person join another and not us? Like, how could you not? I am totally drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm totally a believer. And then I joined thinking that it was this well-oiled machine, and it was, but there were aspects of it that I thought could use significant improvement. And so one of those things was not like, so I later became the chair. I created a committee, and the committee is called the Patient Experience Committee. But ultimately, the way I see it is it's a staff experience committee. And before I created that, I was the chair of the audiology department. So we actually employ more audiologists than anyone in the country other than the VA system. So we have like over 100 audiologists that are employed by us. And the way I saw my role was to be an advocate for the audiologists, to
Any
make
job
sure that
positions you want to tell people here that you're looking for somebody? Any job openings right now?
they're, I mean, here's the problem with such a big practice. There are always people retiring, and we're always, acquiring practices. People join us. We'll like have like 2 or 3 practices in a similar region, and then we'll consolidate them and then make room for new associates. So we are always looking for new associates. So yes, I'm definitely plugging the podcast. I mean, plugging the practice, and I plug the podcast, but it's because I'm a believer. It's run by physicians. The one making the decision at the end of the day are the ones that are seeing patients same as us. So, even if it's going to eke out a little more money, if it's going to make us a little more miserable, we're not going to do it. Right. So yeah, so my role as the chair of the audiology department was to work with someone from the C-suite and make sure that everything with regards to audiology was running smoothly. But the way I saw my responsibility was to make sure that the audiologists were treated well, so that they would want to stay, and they would want to work harder, and they would want to see more patients, and they would want to do well because they're treated well. So I had done a lot of reading on customer service, because that's a place where I thought my practice could do better. And so then after that, I ended up creating this patient experience committee that my goal was the staff experience committee, because ultimately, if you want your patients treated well by the staff, you have to make sure that the staff is treated well. And that's what all the books say. You read the book on American Express, on the Ritz-Carlton, on Disney. You want to know how to make sure that the patient experience is the customer experience is the best one. You work on your staff experience. And so that's something that we're working on now. We're trying to make sure that we are, can be the leaders in the industry on making sure that the staff is treated well. So it's not just about being nice to them. It's about genuinely caring about them and giving them autonomy. So you give them more autonomy to make decisions for themselves, they will appreciate that. They will take that responsibility, and they will run with it. And that makes their job more fulfilling. So I think I went off on a tangent here. Bring me back. Where were we?
You didn't. This is wonderful, because right now, for example, if we're talking to the listener, and the listener is somebody who owns a small practice, or they're in a small group, still you have told them how to make that patient experience better. One of them, through feeding their teams, building teams, creating connection within amongst the team. Is there another way that you guys, or any specific initiatives that you have to make that employee experience any better?
So one thing that I've been doing on this committee is especially since we're such a big practice, right? Like we have, 250 physicians. So it's like over 1,000 employees with lots of different divisions. And so what we do is each time we have a meeting, we invite someone on from a different division to say, what do you think we could do better? And so they're on the front lines. They're the ones that are dealing with patients in situations where we're not. Like, you have a patient who's yelling at the staff, right? They're not going to yell at the physician. They're more than happy to if they've been waiting, to yell at the staff member, but they won't. So we don't see the same things that they see. So I need to know what they're seeing, and I want to know what their ideas are. So I want to sit down and have a meeting and listen to what they have to say. So whenever we have our meetings, there's an invited guest from another division to try and get their perspective on what we can do better. So it's about, for me, it's about creating a pathway from the staff to the very top, because they might have an idea that's going to create change for the entire practice, right? So we need to be able to give them a voice and give them an opportunity to have their ideas heard. So that I found to be a great way to improve the experience. Listen to the
Yeah,
people that know.
definitely, like in medicine, we're gonna get to the cons in a second, and I think this would be a segue to that. There's happiness, right? And there's the elements of happiness. And part of the elements of happiness, you want to be feeling that you're part of something bigger, right? And that you have a sense of awe and that you have a sense of ownership. And if we're able to provide all those things, all those experiences to our employees, they're going to back us. They're going to be there for us. They're going to be there for our patients. There's going to be loyalty that you're creating on that those employees, and we all grow together. Many times, they are helping us as the owners of the business to get also those blind spots that we have because we're busy with our patient, with our clinical responsibilities. They're right there, and they can bring that. So when you bring them and you make them part of that solution, they feel happier, they feel heard, they're part of it, and they're going to have your back, and then you grow like that. But at the same time, when you've been there for a long time in a practice, let's talk about happiness, right? This sense of creativity. It might be that within that practice for such a long time, even though you've had positions where you're able to contribute in such a way that you're saying clinically might not be, as creative, right? So let's talk about the cons of being on that sort of practice for 12 years in your case, and we'll detail a little bit more about them.
So because I niched down, right? Like I don't do head and neck cancer. I actually stopped doing open neck surgery altogether. So like no thyroids and submandibular glands and thyroid glandular ducts. So everything is like transnasal, transoral. I've really niched down. So that means that the pathology that I treat and the things that I see have become much more narrow and much more repetitive. And that can stop being as intellectually stimulating as it once was. So I mean, this is where again the podcast can come in to make it more stimulating, because I'm trying to continue to improve my ability to relate to, connect with, communicate with the patients. So that's stimulating. There are other aspects of it that have become less stimulating. I'm in the same 2 exam rooms that I've been for the last 12 years. And I will continue to be in those 2 exam rooms until I retire. And that is a daunting feeling. I have colleagues that work, or not colleagues, friends that work in banking, and they started out as whatever the terms they use, an associate consultant and an associate, and then a director, and then a managing director, and then a VP. So as they work up, their responsibilities change and their skill sets change, and they need to evolve as leaders and evolve as people and continue learning. And then, whatever they become next is new and exciting. And then, but for me, it's like, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing the same stuff. It can be stagnating intellectually. And that's a problem. That's what you've talked about on the show. And that is like this mid-career crisis. And that mid-career crisis is definitely happening to me. I'm working through it, but definitely happening, and happening to a lot of my friends that I speak to that are, maybe they're otolaryngologists, maybe there's something else, but they're like, man, so this is it. This is it. And
we're going to get all
yeah.
those mid-career crises into our mastermind and then get them out of that mid-career crisis feeling. But because the truth is, when we created the mastermind, one of the things that the main concern that I had was like, who's going to take care of us? We need good doctors to stay practicing. And for many reasons, call it mid-career crisis, call it whatever challenges we're having in medicine, many are leaving or many are switching. So we want physicians to still practice for joy and not for need, and don't feel like that. And that's certainly a concern that we don't recognize. When we go into medicine, we embark on this thing and we go forever. You decided to be a doctor against all odds. You were a doctor, But then there was, you went Dr. Boat, and then you went on through the world being a physician. And we have our friends, like you said, in banking or something like that. In your case, I saw many engineers who every 2 years they're changing careers, right? And then they get a sabbatical. We don't get a sabbatical. We're like, you're not going to get a sabbatical. You pay for your vacation some one way or the other, but you're not going to get a break to learn some other skills on our dime, right? Nobody tells us to do that.
Yeah.
And that way, I think that every physician should have sabbaticals, right? We are on this for a very long time and we don't get that. So that's a con that you have. And, with your podcast, The Physician's Guide to Doctoring, has there been anything that you've learned that has helped you in any way to either identify or work in this way or another way with that feeling of mid-career crisis?
So I think we don't need to reinvent ourselves, but we need to be able to have some type of intellectual stimulation and creative outlet. So there needs to be something. So for me, it's like stuff that I'm learning from the podcast that I'm bringing back into the exam room that then, reminds me of the joy and makes it more stimulating again. So there needs to be something where you are not on autopilot, where you are actively engaged with something new and interesting. I think it comes down to hedonic adaptation, right? Like you get used to, like that car, right? That's the prime example. That fancy car that you spend so much money on brings you joy for the first couple months, and then it just becomes your car and stops being exciting and stops bringing you joy. And so we have to find a way to work against that hedonic adaptation such that we are able to find delight and joy and be engaged in what we're doing. Or an alternative would be do it less. And then in that other time, find joy and delight in, whatever new thing that you're doing. Like one of my happiest friends is the chair of pediatric plastic surgery at an academic institution that will remain nameless. There are not many of them in the country. So some of the listeners will probably be able to figure out who this person is if they know me. And he loves it. Why? Why do I think he loves it? Because some days a week, he's seeing patients in the office. Some days he's in the operating room. Some days he's doing admin. Some days he's doing teaching. Some days he's working on his grants and his research. So he's got such variety that it's hard to develop this hedonic adaptation when your day is constantly changing and you're constantly doing something different. So either, find a way to find new things that you're doing, or you got to take some time away and do those other things, like, less clinical time. So like, for instance, for you, right, you've got your pain practice, right? But you're also you've got all these other entrepreneurial pursuits that are always changing and evolving. So you can still have your clinical practice, but it's not that you're seeing 40 pain patients a day every single day. I know how pain doctors can see a lot of patients in a day,
we
right?
changed to our practice where I am right now, which is a functional medicine, is a wellness center. And no, I will not see 40 patients a day. I'm totally against that. Not even when I was doing interventional pain management, which was just last year in our practice there that I had sold. So no. And we found that, being able to teach was a big component of happiness, keeps you engaged with the younger generation. And changing the dates when you have, as you say, you have the old one, you have the things that you're doing, and then clinically, and then your family and the things that you do outside and all that stuff. One of the things, the points that you bring is like, you're seeing yourself in the same practice until you retire, whatever that is, right? Whenever that is, or cutting back maybe in your clinical hours and staying there for that. And I wonder how the newer generation, because you talked about Gen X, but then there's millennials and Gen Z, and they're really used to see things much quicker, right? Swiping with everything. So I wonder how the newer generations are doing in their jobs. How many will really find these long-term jobs for 12 years and can stick to it and be able to see the results and be able to take care of the whole family. I don't know how that's going to happen in the newer generations. And also now with the advent of AI and in so many other ways, how physicians are going to change. There's a lot of things that we don't know about our future, but just that concept of being in the same practice for such a long time, I don't know how they see it. Can you imagine
Well,
somebody being like, well,
also,
you have many people coming to your practice, so maybe you have a better view because you have 250 doctors in your practice. So you can
well,
tell us a little bit
also
about that.
for employed physicians, right? Like you join a hospital and they're like, here are your exam rooms, see your patients, and go home. And that's, like at least for me, there's a little more ownership because it's my practice. But when you're an employee, you're even more distanced from that. Like there's even less ownership of
Ownership.
it. It's got to be
Hmm.
even worse. It's got to be even worse. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's it's going to be interesting to see
Times. Yeah.
how medicine evolves, how they're able to keep up with it because I'm sure that's we talk about all the contributors to burnout and I'm sure that's that's going to be one of them.
Well, we're getting to the end of our podcast. Let's see if you have any particular idea that you want to share that you haven't after you gave us like that wonderful speech about patient communication here, which I loved. Any other idea that you want to share with our listeners before we tell them where to find you and to get a job from your practice and all that stuff?
Yeah. The you're about designing your life and being intentional. And so, the question is, what's ultimately important at the end of the day? And there was something that you had said about, communicating with your patients and relationships. And that's one of the most important things in life, right? The important things in life are experiences, relationships, and passions, right? That's what's important. And so if you can cultivate those relationships with your patients, you'll find your work more enjoyable and you'll find your work more fulfilling. So you have to view it that way. I mean, if you're an anesthesiologist and you're going to be seeing these patients for a couple of minutes, I can see where you'd be like, you know what? But still, even those
Or a
little
radiologist,
moments,
right?
yeah.
Or a
Well, that's yeah,
pathologist. That would be a little bit more difficult.
yeah, harder to find a relationship with a slide, but maybe
But with
fostering
a dead
relationships
person.
with colleagues that you're communicating with, right? Like, how can I build a bridge in the relationships in my life? And if you can work on the strength of those relationships, whether they're with colleagues or patients, I think you'll get a lot more out of life.
Well, thank you for being here. I had just a wonderful time with you at our podcast. And tell us where people can find you and where people can apply for a job with you.
So my practice, if you're an ENT or an allergist, we're ENT and Allergy Associates, so entanallergy.com. And my podcast, first and foremost, I would like to plug the most. That's Physician's Guide to Doctoring.com and at Physician's Guide on Twitter or X, if whatever it's called now, and Instagram and LinkedIn. I'm Bradley B. Block, not to be confused with Bradley M. Block, who is also a physician, but not me. At Physician's Guide to Doctoring.com.
Well,
Wherever
shout
fine
out to
podcasts are
Bradley
sold.
and Blog too, right? Well, thank you for being here. And I can't wait to be in your podcast. We'll see you then.
See you then.
Thanks. Well, guys, that's it for today. I hope that you had a wonderful time and learned a lot like I did with Dr. Block. You can actually find more of him at his website, Physician's Guide to Doctoring, and also at his podcast with the same name. Please join us next time. Reach out to us through our website, maxsalur.com. If you're ready to earn the minimum of 40 CMEs and at the same time you're achieving change for your life, please visit our website, maxsalur.com, where we will help you with entrepreneurship. Please share this episode with your friends, subscribe to our podcast, give us 5 stars. We'll see you then. Have a great week. Thanks. Bye.
Please remember that Design is not providing specific financial, medical, or career advice. Our only intent is to stimulate your appetite for growth by sharing our experience and those of our speakers, coaches, and guests. Your personal growth and success will be unique to your circumstances and your hard work. We sincerely hope you enjoyed the show and look forward to seeing you next week.